August 1, 1941, Bethpage, Long Island, New York. Chief Test Pilot Robert Hall climbed into the cockpit of something that looked more like a flying water tower than an aircraft. The XTB-1 prototype sat on the runway, its barrel-shaped fuselage almost comical in proportion. 54 feet of wingspan, trying to lift what was essentially a 7-ton flying warehouse powered by a single engine. Navy observers gathered along the runway shook their heads. Too big, too complicated, too ambitious. The prototype looked like an engineering committee's fever dream. Every requirement the Navy had demanded somehow crammed into one ungainly airframe. Internal bomb bay, powered turret, folding wings, self-sealing fuel tanks, armor protection. It was all there, and it all added weight. Thousands of pounds of weight. Hall advanced the throttle. The Wright R2600 Cyclone engine roared to life, 14 cylinders producing 1,100 horsepower. The aircraft began its takeoff roll. Slowly, heavily, the tail came up. The main gear lifted off. The prototype clawed its way into the August sky, and in that moment the critics were certain they had been proven right. This thing would never work in combat. They couldn't have been more spectacularly wrong. The journey to that first flight began 2 years earlier, in March 1939, when the United States Navy issued a requirement that would challenge every aircraft manufacturer in America. The Douglas TBD Devastator, introduced just 2 years prior, was already obsolete. Japanese and European aircraft development had accelerated beyond anything American planners had anticipated. The Navy needed a replacement torpedo bomber, and they needed it immediately. The specifications seemed designed to guarantee failure. 300 miles per hour top speed, 1,000-mile range, 3-man crew, all ordnance carried internally, electrically powered defensive turret, armor protection throughout, self-sealing fuel tanks, and perhaps most ambitiously, the entire package had to fit on an aircraft carrier elevator. 13 companies submitted proposals. The competition quickly narrowed to 2 finalists. Vought Aviation offered the XTBU-1, a sleek, elegant design that won immediate praise from Navy evaluators. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation submitted the XTBF-1, a design that looked like someone had taken their successful F-4F Wildcat fighter and inflated it to grotesque proportions. Vought got the initial contract, but there was a problem. Vought was drowning in orders for their F-4U Corsair fighter. Production lines were at capacity. Delivery schedules were impossible. The Navy couldn't wait. War was coming, and every intelligence assessment said it was coming soon. The contract was transferred to Grumman in April 1940. Leroy Grumman and his chief engineer, William Schwendler, found themselves with an impossible deadline to build an impossible aircraft. They had 18 months to turn drawings into a combat-ready torpedo bomber. 18 months to solve problems that had defeated every previous attempt. Robert Hall, the engineer actually building the thing, stared at the mountain of requirements and did the math. Everything the Navy wanted required adding weight, complexity, and systems that had never been successfully integrated into a carrier aircraft. The internal bomb bay alone presented nightmarish challenges. It needed to accommodate a 22-inch Mark 13 torpedo weighing 2,000 pounds, or 4 500-pound bombs, or depth charges or mines. The bay doors had to operate reliably in salt spray, high-G maneuvers, and combat damage. Hydraulic systems weren't reliable enough. Manual systems were too slow. Then there was the powered turret. Every previous attempt at rear turrets in American aircraft had failed. Hydraulic systems froze at altitude. Manual systems couldn't track fast-moving fighters. Grumman made a bet that would either vindicate or destroy the entire program. They chose an electrically powered turret. If the electrical system failed in combat, the rear gunner would be helpless. The aircraft would be defenseless. The wing folding mechanism added another layer of seemingly insurmountable complexity. To fit on carrier elevators and in hangar decks, those massive 54-foot wings needed to fold. But how? The wingspan was the largest of any single-engine Navy aircraft. The structural loads were enormous. The locking mechanisms had to be absolutely fail-safe. A wing that unfolded in flight meant instant death. Leroy Grumman himself solved this problem during a design meeting, using items at hand. He took a pink rubber eraser to represent the fuselage and stuck paper clips into it as wings. By experimenting with angles, he discovered what became known as the stow wing, a compound angle folding mechanism that allowed the massive wings to fold back and upward simultaneously, reducing the wingspan to just 19 feet. The mechanism required hydraulic systems, multiple locking pins, and structural reinforcements that added hundreds of pounds to an already overweight design, but it worked. On paper at least, it worked. The Wright R2600-8 engine, a twin-row 14-cylinder radial, producing 1,700 horsepower, was the most powerful engine available. It had to be. Empty weight, 10,080 pounds. Maximum combat weight, 15,905 pounds. This made the TBF the heaviest single-engine aircraft in the world. Critics within the Navy called it the pregnant beast, others called it the turkey. The names were not compliments. Some question whether complexity serves survival or just creates more failure points. What's your take? Is over-engineering the key to toughness, or does simplicity win wars? December 30, 1940. The Navy placed an order for 286 TBF-1 aircraft. The prototype hadn't even flown yet. The urgency was absolute. Intelligence reports from Europe painted a grim picture. Germany was rolling across the continent. Japan was expanding through Asia. America would be in this war, whether it wanted to be or not. That first flight on August 1, 1941 revealed both promise and problems. The aircraft flew, but it flew like a truck, heavy, ponderous, nothing like the nimble fighters pilots were accustomed to. The controls were mushy, visibility was poor despite the high cockpit placement. The aircraft demanded constant attention, constant correction, constant muscle, but it was stable, it could carry its full load, and most remarkably, all those intricate systems that critics said would fail, actually worked. The bomb bay doors operated smoothly, the turret rotated under power, the wings folded and locked, the self-sealing fuel tanks held pressure, every complicated system functioned as designed. Then came November 28, 1941. The first prototype caught fire during a test flight near Brentwood, New York. Both test pilots, Robert Hall and Gordon Israel, successfully bailed out as flames consumed the aircraft. The prototype crashed into a wooded area and was destroyed. Critics pounced. The design was too elaborate, too many systems, too many potential failure points. The electrical turret, the folding wings, the massive bomb bay, all of it was too ambitious. The program should be cancelled immediately before more money was wasted on this flying disaster. Grumman's response was to accelerate production. The second prototype was nearly ready. Testing continued with increased intensity. Problems were identified and solved through brute force engineering. On January 3, 1942, less than 5 months after the first prototype crashed, less than 4 weeks after Pearl Harbor brought America into the war, the first production TBF-1 was completed. By early June 1942, more than 100 TBF Avengers had been delivered to the Navy. 6 of these aircraft were assigned to Torpedo Squadron 8 for evaluation. The squadron's devastators had already deployed aboard the carrier Hornet. The 6 Avengers arrived at Pearl Harbor just hours after the carriers had departed for a crucial battle near a tiny atoll called Midway. Volunteers were called for. 6 crews raised their hands. Many had never flown out of sight of land. Most had logged fewer than 50 hours in the Avenger. All 6 aircraft made it to Midway Island on June 4, 1942. Vow 7 Tirishal hours. 6 brand new TBF Avengers took off from Midway Island's Henderson Field as part of the first wave of attacks against the approaching Japanese carrier fleet. The aircraft had been in service for exactly 5 months. The crews had almost no combat experience. They were flying the most complicated torpedo bomber ever built into the teeth of the most experienced carrier force in the world. The Japanese Combat Air Patrol fell upon them like wolves. Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, flown by veterans of Pearl Harbor, China, and the Dutch East Indies, tore into the lumbering Avengers. The TBF's defensive armament, a single 50 caliber machine gun in the dorsal turret and a 30 caliber gun in the ventral position, proved woefully inadequate against determined fighter attacks. The Avengers were slow. At maximum torpedo attack speed, they could barely manage 130 miles per hour. The Zeros could exceed 300. One by one, the Avengers fell. Ensign Albert Kyle Ernest's aircraft took hit after hit. 20mm cannon shells punched through the wings, the fuselage, the tail. His turret gunner, aviation machinist's mate 3rd Class J. Manning, was killed instantly by a cannon shell to the chest. His radio man, aviation radio man 3rd Class Harry Ferrier, just 17 years old, was wounded in the head and wrist. The hydraulic system failed. The electrical system sparked and smoked. Ernest's instrument panel shattered. Blood from his wounded radio man sprayed across the cockpit. But the TBF kept flying. The massive radial engine, despite multiple hits, continued to produce power. The self-sealing fuel tanks, one of those intricate systems critics had questioned, prevented the aircraft from exploding when bullets punctured the wings. The armor plating, that extra weight critics said would doom the aircraft's performance, saved Ernest's life when cannon shells struck directly behind his seat. 5 of the 6 Avengers were shot down. Only Ernest's battered aircraft made it back to Midway, crash landing on the runway with 1 crew member dead, 2 wounded. Both Ernest and Ferrier survived their injuries. The surviving aircraft was later examined by Navy engineers. It had been struck by at least 9 20mm cannon shells and 64 7.7mm machine gun bullets. Nearly every major system had been damaged or destroyed, yet it had flown home with 2 survivors. 83% casualties for the Avengers at Midway. Critics renewed their calls to cancel the program. The aircraft was too vulnerable, too elaborate. The losses proved it was a failure. But intelligence officers studying the damaged aircraft reached a completely different conclusion. Ensign Ernest's TBF had absorbed enough damage to destroy 10 normal aircraft, yet it had flown home with 2 survivors. The electrical turret, despite the catastrophic damage, had continued to function until the turret gunner was killed. The bomb bay doors had operated correctly under fire. The folding wing mechanism had not failed despite multiple hits to the wing structure. The right engine had run for 2 hours after being struck multiple times. The aircraft was not too elaborate, it was too tough. Every intricate system, every redundancy, every backup had been designed into the TBF for exactly this scenario, taking damage and continuing to fight. The over-engineered sophisticated Avenger had brought its crew home when no other aircraft could have survived. Production accelerated dramatically. By August 1942, dozens of Avengers were reaching fleet squadrons every week. Torpedo Squadron 8, reformed with new pilots and new aircraft, they would go on to earn 2 Presidential Unit citations, becoming one of the most decorated squadrons in naval aviation history. Ensign Ernest rejoined the squadron and fought at Guadalcanal, earning his 2nd Navy Cross. The Battle of the Eastern Solomons on August 24, 1942, provided the first real test of Avenger tactics with experienced crews. 28 TBFs from the carriers Saratoga and Enterprise attacked the Japanese fleet in coordinated strikes. They sank the light carrier Rujo with multiple torpedo hits. 7 Avengers were lost, but the survivors learned crucial lessons. The aircraft could absorb tremendous damage. The electrical turret could engage multiple fighters simultaneously. The internal bomb bay allowed for quick ordnance changes between strikes. The long range allowed for attacks far beyond what previous torpedo bombers could reach. But the most remarkable transformation was happening far from the Pacific headlines. In the cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean, German U-boats were winning the tonnage war, sinking Allied merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. The introduction of small escort carriers provided air coverage for convoys, but existing aircraft were inadequate for anti-submarine warfare. The Avenger, with its large bomb bay, long range and ability to carry radar, proved perfect for the role. The TBF-1D variant, equipped with ASB surface search radar, could detect surfaced U-boats at night or in bad weather. The large bomb bay could carry depth charges, bombs, acoustic torpedoes, and the top-secret Mark 24 Fido homing torpedo. Avengers operating from escort carriers began stalking U-boats with devastating effectiveness. The aircraft that had been designed to sink battleships was now hunting submarines. The tactics were elegant in their simplicity. Avengers equipped with radar would patrol ahead of convoys, searching for surfaced U-boats. When contact was made, the Avenger would attack with depth charges and rockets, forcing the submarine to dive. Once submerged, the U-boat's speed dropped from 18 knots to 8 knots. The Avenger would circle overhead, dropping sonobuoys to track the submerged submarine while calling in destroyer escorts for the kill. From May 1943 to May 1945, Avengers flying from American escort carriers sank or assisted in sinking 35 U-boats in the Atlantic. British Avengers added to the tally. The total submarine kills reached approximately 30 when counting Pacific operations against Japanese submarines. No other aircraft came close to this record. The year 1944 brought the Avenger to its peak effectiveness. By this time, nearly 10,000 had been built. General Motors' Eastern Aircraft Division had taken over most production, churning out thousands of TBMs while Grumman focused on producing the new F-6F Hellcat fighter. The transition had been remarkable. When Grumman needed GM to take over production, they delivered a demonstration TBF to Detroit held together entirely with sheet metal screws, a so-called PK Avenger named for the Parker Callan screw manufacturer. This allowed GM engineers to disassemble the aircraft part by part and redesign it for automotive-style mass production. Leroy Grumman had doubted GM could build even one Avenger. Instead, GM produced more than 3 times as many as Grumman itself. October 1944 brought the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. Approximately 400 Avengers participated across all phases of the battle. The engagement at Samar became one of the most dramatic confrontations in naval history. 6 escort carriers faced 4 Japanese battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers and 11 destroyers. The escort carriers, designated Taffy 3, were outnumbered and outgunned catastrophically. The Avengers had no armor-piercing bombs. Many had no torpedoes, having been loaded for ground support missions. They attacked anyway, making repeated runs with whatever ordnance they carried. Some pilots made dry runs with no weapons at all, trying to distract Japanese gunners and buy time for the carriers to escape. The ferocity of the American defense convinced the Japanese admiral he faced fleet carriers with full air groups, not escort carriers. After sinking 1 escort carrier and 3 destroyers, the Japanese withdrew. The Avengers of Taffy III had helped turn away the most powerful surface fleet Japan had sent to sea since Midway. On April 7, 1945, the super battleship Yamato made her final sortie. Operation Tengo was a suicide mission, sending the battleship on a one-way trip to Okinawa with only enough fuel for the outbound voyage. American submarines spotted the task force and reported its position. Admiral Mitchell launched everything he had. 386 aircraft, including nearly 150 Avengers, swarmed the Japanese force. The attack began at 12:37 in the afternoon. The first wave of Avengers attacked from the port side, overwhelming the Yamato's anti-aircraft defenses. The second wave attacked from starboard. The third wave found the ship listing heavily but still afloat. The torpedo impacts continued. American sources report at least 11 torpedo hits. The Yamato's massive armor, designed to defeat battleship shells, could not stop torpedoes hitting below the waterline. At 2:23 in the afternoon, 2 hours and 46 minutes after the first attack, the Yamato exploded in a mushroom cloud visible for 60 miles. Casualties numbered between 2,500 and 3,100 crew members from a complement of approximately 3,000. The era of the battleship died with her. The Avengers had killed both Yamato-class super battleships. They had also sunk or helped sink 12 carriers, 4 additional battleships, 19 cruisers, 25 destroyers and approximately 30 submarines. The total tonnage exceeded 1 million tons of enemy shipping. No other aircraft type came close to this record. The statistics tell the story that critics refused to see. Nearly 10,000 Avengers delivered, over 46,000 combat sorties flown, total combat losses, 729 aircraft. The loss rate, 1.58% per sortie, was among the lowest of any combat aircraft in the war. The elaborate systems that were supposed to fail rarely did. The aircraft that was too heavy to fight proved too tough to kill. The Avengers' service did not end in 1945. Post-war variants continued flying with the US Navy until 1954. The Royal Canadian Navy operated Avengers until 1960, using them for anti-submarine warfare in the North Atlantic. France operated Avengers in Indochina. Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force used them into the early 1960s. The elaborate aircraft that was supposedly difficult to maintain proved remarkably easy to keep flying, with many nations preferring it to newer, supposedly better designs. Today, approximately 60 Avengers survive in various conditions worldwide. Several are maintained in airworthy condition by dedicated organizations and collectors. When a restored Avenger flies overhead, its unmistakable silhouette and distinctive engine note transport observers back to a time when these unlikely warriors ruled the Pacific skies. The Avenger that took off from Bethpage in August 1941, the ungainly beast that critics dismissed, proved them all wrong. It did not do so through elegance or simplicity. It did so through relentless effectiveness, mission after mission, year after year, in every role the war demanded. The sophisticated torpedo bomber that should have failed instead rewrote the rules of naval aviation and sank more enemy ships than any other aircraft in history. In the end, it was not elaborate enough to fail. It was sophisticated enough to win. And in winning, it brought home more of its crews alive than any other torpedo bomber ever built. That achievement, more than tonnage sunk or battle stars earned, stands as the true measure of the Avengers' success. The aircraft kept its promise. It brought them home.